My name is Alexis, and I'm 32 years old. For the last 10 years, I lived in the basement apartment of my parents' house. I paid my rent, I fixed their plumbing, and I was the reliable daughter who was always there. But when my sister, their golden child, got a messy divorce and needed a place to land, they handed me a 30-day eviction notice. They thought I would quietly pack my boxes and disappear like an inconvenience that had been solved. They never expected that I already had a lawyer, and that a document with their own signatures on it was about to turn my nightmare into my greatest leverage. If you're watching this and have ever felt taken for granted by the very people who are supposed to support you, let me know where you're from in the comments. And before I tell you exactly how it all went down, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about family boundaries and taking back your power. Before my life imploded, it had a familiar rhythm, a quiet stability built on a foundation of injustice I'd grown to accept. I'm a freelance graphic designer, a job that allows me to work from home, which was a perfect fit for living in the one-bedroom apartment my parents had renovated in their basement. Make no mistake, it wasn't a free ride. I paid them $800 a month, a fair market rate for our area, and the unspoken agreement was that I would also serve as their unofficial, unpaid property manager. A leaky faucet? I'd fix it. The Wi-Fi goes out? I was the one spending hours on the phone with tech support. Need someone to house sit and watch their dog while they vacationed in Florida every winter? Reliable Alexis was always on call. My relationship with my parents, Mark and Susan, was complicated. They loved me in their own practical, transactional way. But that love always felt conditional. I was the responsible, quiet daughter who never caused any trouble. I studied hard, got scholarships to college to ease their financial burden, and quietly built my career. My sister, Chloe, 2 years older, was a charismatic whirlwind of chaos. She was the sun around which our entire family universe revolved. Chloe was beautiful, outgoing, and had a talent for commanding attention. She was also profoundly irresponsible. This dynamic wasn't new. It was baked into the very bricks of our family from the time we were children. I remember when I was 17, I worked an entire summer bussing tables to save up for my first car, a beat-up '98 Honda Civic. I loved that car. It wasn't just metal and rubber. It was a symbol of the independence I desperately craved. 6 months later, Chloe, then a freshman in college, came home for the weekend and borrowed my car to go to a party. She got behind the wheel after drinking and wrapped it around a tree, totaling it. When the police called, my parents' primary concern wasn't that I had lost my most prized possession, but how they could keep Chloe from getting a DUI. They hired an expensive lawyer who got the charges wiped from her record. When I asked about replacing my car, my father just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Come on, Alexis, it's just a car. Your sister's whole life could have been ruined." They never offered to help me buy another one. Instead, Chloe got a brand new Jetta for Christmas that year, an emotional pick-me-up after her traumatic experience. I took the bus for the rest of my senior year. That was the pattern. Chloe's mistakes were unfortunate learning moments that required cushioning with financial and emotional support. My achievements were quietly expected. My needs always came second to her wants. When Chloe married Brian, a slick investment banker, my parents threw a lavish wedding they couldn't afford, dipping into their retirement funds to pay for it. "She deserves a perfect day," my mother said, her eyes glistening as she showed me photos of the $20,000 venue. I had never asked them for anything remotely similar. When I started my freelance business, I worked on a dying laptop until I personally saved enough to upgrade. The thought of asking my parents for help never even crossed my mind. I knew the answer would be a lecture on fiscal responsibility, a lecture Chloe always seemed to be exempt from. So, I built my life in my sister's shadow. The basement apartment was a compromise. It allowed me to save money and build my client portfolio, while staying close enough to provide the hands-on support my parents increasingly relied on. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was doing the right thing for my family, that my stability and reliability were valuable in their own way. I rationalized the injustice because facing it was too painful. I thought I could keep living in this fragile equilibrium forever. But I had no idea that a storm was coming. One that would shatter the false peace I'd built for myself. The catalyst, as it so often was Chloe. The call came on a Tuesday night. I was finishing up a project for a client when I heard my mother shriek upstairs, followed by uncontrollable sobs. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding, assuming something terrible had happened. I found my mother crumpled on the kitchen floor, the phone dropped from her hand. My father standing over her, his face ashen. "What is it?" I asked, my mind immediately jumping to the worst. "It's Chloe," my father said, his voice trembling. "Brian, that son of a bitch, he left her." It turned out Chloe's picture-perfect life was a facade. Brian had been having an affair for years. He had drained their joint bank accounts to fund his life with his mistress and was now filing for divorce. Chloe, who had never worked a day in their marriage, was left with next to nothing but the car in her name and a designer wardrobe she could no longer afford to maintain. My parents' reaction was immediate and predictable. They snapped into crisis mode, but their focus was singular. "Where will she live?" my mother cried. "She has no money. She has nothing." My father was already pacing, calling divorce attorneys, his voice thick with rage. "We're not going to let her go through this alone. We'll take care of our daughter." In all those initial chaotic hours, not once did anyone ask how I was. Not once did it occur to them how Chloe's implosion might affect me. I was simply a quiet presence, the one who made my mother tea and listened to my father vent. My own initial reaction was one of genuine sympathy. Despite our history, Chloe was my sister. Seeing her in that much pain was difficult. I hated Brian for what he had done to her. I worried about her future. Chloe moved back home that weekend. Her belongings, boxes filled with the relics of a luxury life, piled up in the garage. She took over her old bedroom, which had been kept as a pristine shrine since the day she'd left. The atmosphere in the house changed instantly. It grew heavy, saturated with Chloe's grief and my parents' ceaseless anxiety. Every conversation revolved around her. The lawyer appointments, Brian's demands, the sheer betrayal of it all. At first, I did my best to be supportive. I cooked meals I knew she liked. I listened for hours as she recounted every detail of Brian's infidelity. I lent her money when she needed to buy essentials, knowing I'd never see it back. I did it because that's what family does. But I quickly began to notice something unsettling. Chloe's presence didn't feel temporary. It felt like an occupation. And the way my parents started looking at me wasn't with gratitude for my support, but with a kind of cold calculation I'd never seen before. The fragile balance I'd been living in was about to break, and I was completely unprepared for the cruelty of what was coming next. The shift happened slowly, and then all at once. At first, it was the little things. My mother would borrow my milk from the mini fridge in my apartment because Chloe preferred a specific brand of oat milk. My father would complain about the music I listened to while I worked, even though I always wore headphones, saying the vibrations were upsetting Chloe. My sister would use the washer and dryer in our shared utility space and leave her clothes in them for days, forcing me to go to a laundromat. Each incident was a minor annoyance on its own, but they accumulated like 1,000 paper cuts to my patience. The first real escalation happened about 3 weeks into Chloe's stay. I was in my apartment one evening, trying to focus on a major project with a tight deadline. The noise from upstairs was deafening. Chloe was on a FaceTime call with her friends, her shrieks and laughter echoing through the floorboards. I tried to ignore it, but after an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. I went upstairs quietly. "Mom," I whispered to my mother in the kitchen, "could you please ask Chloe to keep it down just a little? I'm trying to work." "And Vin," my mother turned to me, her expression cold. "Alexandra, your sister is going through a divorce. She needs her friends. Can't you be less selfish for once? It's just your work." "It's the work that pays my rent," I countered softly. "And my bills." "Don't you take that tone with me," she snapped. "This is a family crisis. We need you to be flexible. I went back to my apartment, feeling a hot mixture of anger and shame. Flexible was apparently a euphemism for suffer in silence. The following week, it got worse. I came home from a meeting to find Chloe and my mother in my apartment. They hadn't knocked. They'd simply used their spare key to let themselves in. They were measuring the space with a tape measure. "What are you two doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Oh, Alexis, you're home," my mother said, not a hint of apology in her tone. "Chloe and I were just looking at some ideas. She needs a place to set up a desk so she can start looking for a job." "In my apartment?" I asked, incredulous. "Well, you have all this space you're not using," Chloe said, gesturing to the corner where I'd set up my small workout area. "And it's so much quieter down here than upstairs." The audacity was stunning. They weren't just invading my privacy, they were actively planning on colonizing my space. I tried to reason with them. "Listen, I'm happy she's here, but this is my living and working space. I need my privacy. Can't we set something up for her upstairs?" My father, who had overheard, came in. "Alexis, don't be difficult. Your sister needs our support. You've got a nice apartment down here while she's sleeping in her childhood bedroom. Show some compassion." The conversation was over. I had been branded as difficult and uncompassionate. Gaslighting was their weapon of choice, and they wielded it with expertise. I felt like I was going crazy. Was I overreacting? Was I being selfish? The wake-up call came from my best friend Dana. I called her that night, venting my frustration. I told her about the measuring, the critiques, and the growing feeling that I was being pushed out of my own home. Dana listened patiently before saying something that struck me like a bolt of lightning. "Alexis," she said gently, "they don't see it as your home. They see it as an extension of their house that they're letting you use. You pay rent, you fix things, but in their minds, you're not a tenant. You're the daughter who still lives at home, the one who can be moved and inconvenienced as needed." She was right. That was exactly what was happening. The realization was sickening. I thought I was building a life, but I was just living on borrowed space. Space that could be reclaimed at any moment. A few days later, my father approached me. He sat down in the single armchair in my small living area, his face grim. "Alexis, we need to talk," he began. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking, and this situation with Chloe isn't sustainable." For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought they'd seen the light. Maybe they were going to set some boundaries. "She needs her own space," he continued. "A place to heal, to start over. The bedroom upstairs is too small. She needs her own kitchen, her own entrance." I could see where this was going, and a cold dread started to creep up my spine. "What are you saying, Dad?" He looked me straight in the eye, without a flicker of hesitation. "We think it would be best if you found another place to live for a while. Just temporarily, of course. Until Chloe gets back on her feet. This apartment would be perfect for her." I thought I was prepared for it, but hearing the words spoken aloud still felt like a physical blow to the gut. They didn't just want a corner of my space. They wanted all of it. They were willing to make their own daughter homeless to accommodate their other daughter. The escalation was complete. The masks were off, and I knew a confrontation was now unavoidable. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, staring at my father, trying to process the cold-blooded cruelty of his proposal. "Temporarily?" I finally managed, my voice hoarse. "And how long is temporarily, Dad? Until Chloe finds a job? Until she starts dating again? Until she decides she's healed enough?" My father's defenses shot up instantly. "Don't take that tone with me, Alexis. We are trying to find a solution for this family." "No," I said, standing up. "You are trying to find a solution for Chloe. At my expense. Do you even realize what you're asking me to do? You're asking me to give up my home." "Technically, this is our home," he said. And that line, the one Dana had predicted, hit me like a knife. "We're just asking you to make a small sacrifice for your sister." The conversation ended in a stalemate. I told him I needed time to think. which was code for, "I need time to contain the rage boiling inside me so I don't say something I'll regret." For the next few days, the house was a silent war zone. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. Chloe would stay in her room or talk loudly on the phone, a clear act of defiance. My father would look at me with an air of disappointment, as if I were the one causing all this tension. They thought they could wear me down. They thought the constant psychological pressure would make me crack, that I would simply give in and start looking for a new apartment. They had gravely underestimated me. They didn't realize that the shock of their request had done something to me. It had hardened something that was once soft. It had replaced years of passive acceptance with a cold, steely resolve. The last straw came on a Friday afternoon. I had been out meeting a client, and when I returned, there was an envelope taped to the door of my apartment. It was a plain white business envelope, my name written on it in my mother's handwriting. My heart beat a little faster as I tore it open. Inside wasn't a handwritten letter. It was a formal, typed document. At the top, in bold letters, it read, 30. Day notice to terminate tenancy. I had to read it 3 times. The language was dry, impersonal, citing a non-existent clause in our verbal agreement. It stated that, due to changing family circumstances, my month-to-month tenancy was being terminated. I had 30 days to remove my property and vacate the premises. It was signed at the bottom by both my mother and my father. They had made it official. They had turned a family matter into a cold, legal transaction. They weren't treating me like a daughter, but like a nuisance tenant they wanted to get rid of. The indignity of it was profound. This act, this cruel, unfeeling act of serving their own child a formal eviction notice, shattered whatever was left of our relationship. That was my moment of clarity. Standing in the dim basement hallway, holding that piece of paper, I realized there was nothing left to save. No conversation could fix this. No compromise could heal this wound. They had deemed me disposable. They had written me off. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was cold and clear. It brought a focus I hadn't felt before. They had declared war. They just didn't know I was already armed. I went into my apartment, locked the door, and walked straight to my filing cabinet. I dug around in the back until I found it. A manila folder I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a document I thought I would never need. A document they had surely forgotten ever existed. As I looked at it, a slow, bitter smile spread across my face. The game had changed, and I was about to rewrite the rules. My secret weapon wasn't something flashy or complex. It was a simple legal document, born from the wisdom of a man who understood his family better than anyone. My maternal grandfather, who passed away 5 years ago, was a practical man. He was a carpenter, a man who believed in solid foundations and clear agreements. When I first agreed to move into the basement apartment, he was the one who insisted on a formal arrangement. Family is family, but business is business, he'd told me, his voice still carrying the rural accent of his upbringing. You're paying rent, honey. That makes you a tenant. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. You need a lease. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Grandpa? It's my parents. We don't need a contract. He had shaken his head. You need it because they're your parents. Clear agreements make good neighbors, and they make good families, too. It protects everyone. To appease him, I agreed. He helped me draft it. It was a simple 1-year lease that automatically renewed on a month-to-month basis afterward. It spelled out the rent, my responsibility for utilities, and most importantly, it included a clause my grandfather called the Peace and Quiet Clause. Its legal name was the Covenant of Quiet Enjoyment, guaranteeing my right to live in the premises without unreasonable disturbance from the landlord. And, at his insistence, I added another clause, an early termination penalty. If the landlords my parents terminated the lease without just cause, like non-payment of rent, they would be required to pay me a relocation fee equal to 6 months' rent. I remember my dad laughing when I presented it to them. Alexis, this is silly, he'd said. But if it makes your grandpa happy, sure. They had signed it without really reading it. I had it notarized, on my grandpa's advice, and filed it away. They had completely forgotten about it, but I hadn't. Holding the notarized lease in my hands, I felt a surge of power. This was no longer an emotional family argument. This was a breach of contract. The next morning, I didn't call my parents. I called a lawyer. I searched online for attorneys specializing in landlord-tenant law and found one with stellar reviews, a woman named Sarah Albright. I booked a consultation for that afternoon. Miss Albright's office was downtown, clean and professional. She was in her 40s, with a confident, no-nonsense demeanor that put me at ease immediately. I explained the entire situation, from my sister's arrival and the escalation of demands to the eviction notice taped to my door. Finally, I handed her the lease. She read it carefully, her eyebrows rising when she got to the penalty clause. "Well," she said, looking up at me over her glasses, "your grandfather was a smart man. This is notarized. It's ironclad. So, what are my options?" I asked. "You have several," Miss Albright said, leaning back in her chair. "First, their eviction notice is invalid. They haven't given a just cause for termination. Changing family circumstances is not a legal reason to evict a paying tenant. You could fight the eviction in court, and you would win." She paused, letting that sink in. "Second, and this is where it gets interesting, they have already breached the contract. By attempting to illegally evict you, they have triggered this penalty clause. Legally, they owe you $4,800. I was stunned. I knew the clause was there, but hearing a lawyer confirm it made it real. "So, what's our plan of action?" Miss Albright asked, shifting into strategy mode. "We could send them a cease and desist letter, informing them that their eviction attempt is illegal. Or, we can let them think they're in control, and then confront them. The second option is often more effective in family disputes. It doesn't give them time to prepare a counter-narrative." I chose the second option. I didn't want a drawn-out legal battle. I wanted a swift, decisive resolution that would allow me to leave on my own terms. We mapped out a plan. I would request a family meeting over the weekend, under the pretense of discussing the details of my move. I would let them lay out their terms. And then, Miss Albright would arrive, unannounced, to explain the legal reality of the situation. Leaving her office, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman with a plan. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I got my finances in order, researched apartments in the area, and discreetly packed a few boxes. I played the part of the dutiful, defeated daughter who was accepting her fate. My parents became almost friendly again, the tension lifting now that they thought they'd won. They had no idea they were walking straight into a well-planned ambush. The showdown was set for Sunday at 2 p.m., and I was ready. Sunday arrived with a tense stillness. I spent the morning arranging my apartment, not for packing, but to make sure it looked impeccable. When my family arrived at 2 o'clock, I had coffee ready. My dad, mom, and Chloe walked into my space, their expressions a mixture of pity and impatience. They thought this meeting was about logistics when I would be out, how I would return the key. They thought they held all the cards. "Thanks for coming," I began, my voice deliberately calm. I sat at my small kitchen table, and they took the chairs opposite me. "I wanted to discuss the notice you gave me." "Alexis, there's not much to discuss," my dad said, his tone paternalistic. "We're sorry it had to come to this, but it's what's best for the family. 30 days is more than enough time for you to find a new place." "I really appreciate this, Alexis," Chloe added, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. "It just means the world to me while I try to get my life back together." I let them talk. I let them explain the necessity of my sacrifice, the reasonableness of their actions. I nodded along, feigning understanding. After about 10 minutes, I held up a hand. "I understand your position," I said, "but there's a small problem with your plan." I pulled out the manila folder and placed it on the table. I slid the notarized lease across to them. "Do you remember this?" My dad picked it up, squinting. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, followed by confusion. This was just a formality, something we signed for your grandpa. It's a legally binding contract, I said, my voice still even. A contract you have breached. Don't be ridiculous, Alexis, my mother said with a dismissive wave of her hand. We're family. This doesn't apply. Oh, but it does, said a new voice from the doorway. It most certainly does. Right on cue, Sarah Albright stepped into the apartment. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She radiated an aura of authority that silenced all three of my family members instantly. Hello, Miss Albright said, striding into the room to stand beside me. I'm Sarah Albright. I'm Alexis's attorney. A stunned silence filled the room. The smugness on my parents' faces vanished, replaced by shock and disbelief. Chloe looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. A lawyer? My dad sputtered. Why do you need a lawyer? Because, Miss Albright said, placing her briefcase on the table with a definitive click. My client is being illegally evicted by you, her landlords. For the next 15 minutes, Miss Albright systematically dismantled their entire position. She explained that their eviction notice was null and void. She explained that they had violated the covenant of quiet enjoyment by repeatedly disturbing her client and attempting to take over her living space. And then, she said, arriving at the finale, there's the matter of the penalty clause. She pointed to the relevant paragraph in the contract. As per the terms of the agreement you signed and had notarized, by breaching this lease, you now owe my client a relocation fee of $4,800, payable immediately. My mother gasped. We are not paying her a cent. This is our house. That's where you're mistaken, Mrs. Wilson, Miss Albright said, her voice like ice. Legally, this is my client's home, so long as she continues to pay her rent. You have two options. Option 1. You rescind the eviction notice, apologize to my client for harassing her, and let her live in peace. Option 2. You proceed with this illegal eviction attempt. We sue you for breach of contract. We will claim the $4,800 penalty plus attorney's fees, and we will win. I can absolutely guarantee you that. My father looked like he was about to have a stroke. He looked from the lease, to Miss Albright, to me. Alexis, you can't do this to us, he said, his voice now a plea. We're your family. This was my moment. I stood up, feeling taller than I ever had. I tried to be family, I said. I paid my rent. I fixed your problems. I put up with the favoritism for years. But when you served me a formal eviction notice, you made it clear this isn't a family matter. It's a business matter. So, I hired a business advisor. I nodded toward Miss Albright. So, here's what's going to happen now, I continued. Miss Albright laid out your options, but I'm going to give you a third one. I'm going to move out, but I will not be forced out. I will move on my own timeline after I found a suitable place. And you will pay me the $4,800 as stipulated in the contract. Consider it my security deposit on my new life. You can take it out of the rent I've paid you for the last decade. Chloe, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. Alexis, please, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem anymore, Chloe, I said, and the lack of emotion in my own voice surprised me. You have them to figure that out for you. They're clearly willing to do anything for you. The showdown was over. There was nothing left to say. They were utterly defeated, disarmed by a piece of paper they had dismissed as a joke. I had taken back control of my life. Miss Albright gathered her things, gave me a satisfied nod, and left. I left my family sitting in stunned silence in my apartment, my home, and walked outside to breathe fresh air for what felt like the first time in a very long time. The aftermath of the showdown was swift and decisive. My father wrote me the check right then and there, his face a mask of suppressed fury and bitter resignation. The conversation was over. No apologies were offered, but no more demands were made either. They left my apartment in silence, defeated. That night, the house existed in a strange state of tension. There was no yelling, no arguing, just a thick, awkward quiet. I spent the evening applying for apartments I'd been eyeing online. With the $4,800 check in hand, plus my own savings, I was suddenly in a position to afford the deposit and first month's rent on a really great place. The following week, I was approved for a beautiful one-bedroom in a vibrant neighborhood about 20 minutes away. It had huge windows, hardwood floors, and a modern kitchen. Most importantly, it was mine. All mine. The move itself was surreal. I hired professional movers, and as they carried my belongings out of the basement apartment, my parents and Chloe stayed upstairs, completely out of sight. They didn't come down to say goodbye. They didn't offer to help. They simply hid, unable to face the tangible consequences of their actions. When the last box was on the truck, I did one final walkthrough of the empty apartment. For 10 years, this place had been my sanctuary and my prison. Leaving it felt otherworldly. I left the keys on the kitchen counter with a short note. Good luck with your new tenant. Driving away from my childhood home for the last time, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel loss. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as if a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I spent the first few weeks in my new apartment reveling in the freedom. I painted the walls a shade of blue I'd always wanted. I bought a comfortable sofa. I worked in uninterrupted silence to my own music. It was glorious. I heard updates about my family sporadically, through brief, stilted phone calls from my mother. Chloe had moved into the basement apartment shortly after I left. But according to my mom, it wasn't the perfect solution they'd imagined. Chloe wasn't a good tenant. She wasn't neat. She wasn't handy. She didn't pay rent, because of course she didn't. The financial burden of fully supporting another adult was starting to weigh on my soon-to-be retired parents. They had also lost the $800 a month in income from me, and now had to deal with all the minor household repairs themselves. During one call, my mother let it slip. "Things just seem so much harder since you've been gone." I said nothing. I just let the statement hang in the air. My new dawn was peaceful and full of promise. I was landing new clients, and my business was growing. I started dating a little. I was building a life on my own terms, unburdened by the obligations and resentments of the past. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone's daughter or someone's sister. I was just Alexis, and that was more than enough. 8 months after I moved out, my life had transformed in ways I could have barely imagined. The freedom wasn't just a feeling. It had become a catalyst for growth. Working in my own quiet, inspiring space, my creativity exploded. I landed 2 major corporate clients, and my income doubled. I was no longer just a freelancer getting by. I was a successful small business owner. My apartment had become a home, filled with art I loved and friends who genuinely cared about me. Justice, it turned out, wasn't a dramatic event, but a slow, organic process of actions having consequences. My family's fate was a testament to that. I heard from an aunt that my parents had to postpone their retirement. The loss of my rental income, combined with the expense of fully supporting Chloe and her spending habits, had blown a significant hole in their finances. The house, without my constant maintenance, was beginning to show its age. A pipe burst in the upstairs bathroom, and they had to pay a fortune for an emergency plumber, a job I could have handled myself in an afternoon. The biggest change, however, was in Chloe. Living alone in the basement, without me there to act as a buffer, had forced her to confront reality. My parents, as doting as they were, couldn't fill every void. They couldn't be her friends, they couldn't find her a job, and their presence was a constant reminder of her dependency. About 6 months after I left, Chloe called me. It was the first time we'd really spoken since the showdown. Her voice was different. The brittle confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, genuine vulnerability. "How are you, Alexis?" she asked. "You know what, Chloe? I'm doing really, really well," I answered honestly. There was a long pause. Listen, she finally said. You were right. About everything. I was a nightmare. I was selfish and entitled, and I took you completely for granted. I am so sorry. It was the apology I had waited my entire life to hear. And surprisingly, it didn't fill me with a sense of triumphant victory. It just filled me with a quiet sadness for the years we had lost. Thank you for saying that, Chloe, I said. She went on to explain that she had started therapy. She'd gotten a part-time job at a retail store. She was beginning to rebuild her life, slowly and with difficulty. It turns out, she said with a sad little laugh, being a grown-up is actually hard. Our relationship began a slow process of healing, but it was built on a new foundation. It was no longer based on the old dynamic of the golden child and the responsible caretaker. It was based on two adults, both finding their own way. I started visiting on holidays, but the terms were different now. I came as a guest in their home, not as the resident handyman. I set clear boundaries, and because they were afraid of losing me completely, they respected them. During one such visit, my father and I were alone in the kitchen. He was struggling to open a jar, and I took it from him and twisted it open with ease. Thanks, he mumbled. He paused, then looked at me, and in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. Respect. I'm proud of you, Alexis, he said. What you've built for yourself. I should have seen it sooner. That was the moment I knew justice had truly been served. It wasn't about them paying a penalty or admitting I was legally right. It was about them finally seeing me. Not as a convenient solution to their problems, not as a backup plan, but as her own woman who had claimed her own worth. My independence had forced them to reevaluate me, and in doing so, our broken family had a chance to start over, this time with a bit more honesty. When I look back on the insane journey of this past year, from feeling trapped in that basement to the freedom of my life now, the biggest lesson I've learned isn't about law or contracts. It's about self-worth. For years, I allowed my value to be defined by my family. I was reliable Alexis, the fixer, the good daughter. I played those roles because I thought it was the only way to earn love and acceptance. But their final act, that eviction notice, was a cruel gift. It forced me to realize that respect doesn't come from making yourself agreeable. It has to start from within. By standing up for myself, by setting a boundary that could not be crossed, I taught them how to treat me. More importantly, I taught myself that I deserved better. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love is being willing to walk away. The independence I found wasn't just financial or physical. It was emotional. It was the understanding that I am a whole person, on my own, and I don't need anyone's approval to validate that. And the great irony is, it was only when I stopped seeking their approval that I finally began to earn their respect. So, I want to ask you, have you ever had to make a hard choice to prioritize your own peace over keeping the family happy? What was the moment that made you realize it was time to draw a line in the sand? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd really love to hear them. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the most difficult circumstances. And be sure to share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that they have a right to claim their own space in the world. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are not a supporting character in someone else's story. You are the main character in your own. Act accordingly.